What can a man worth $3 billion learn from someone who has almost nothing? The billionaire didn't just witness an act of charity on that bridge. He witnessed a truth that all his wealth had never been able to show him. When I came across this story, I stopped. Completely. And I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. Because what happened there that day will change the way you see generosity, faith, and what it truly means to live. If you're ready, let's go back to the moment that billion-dollar lesson began. His name was James Hargrove. Swiss by birth, global by ambition. By 40, he had built one of Europe's most respected private equity firms. By 60, his personal wealth had crossed $3 billion. He was not a cruel man. He gave to charity, his accountant made sure of that. Every December, a carefully calculated percentage moved from his accounts into foundations with impressive names. He signed the documents. He never asked where the money went. James believed he understood the world. He understood leverage and risk. He understood how capital moved between continents. He understood that time was the only resource money could not buy back, and so he did not waste a minute of it. But there was one thing James Hargrove had never understood. He didn't know this yet. He would learn it on a Tuesday morning in Istanbul, from a man whose name he would never know. He was in the city for 48 hours. A meeting with a consortium of Turkish infrastructure investors. Routine. His assistant Adam had arranged everything, the hotel, the transfers, the breakfast briefing. James did not need to think. He simply arrived, as he always did. That Tuesday morning, he left the hotel at 6:45. The car was waiting. Adam sat beside him, already speaking, projected returns, stakeholder concerns, revised term sheets. James nodded at the right moments. Outside the window, Istanbul moved past like a slow dream he had not asked to have. The car crossed Galata Bridge at 7 in the morning. Adam was still talking. James had stopped listening. Something outside the window had caught his eye, though he could not yet say what. Below the bridge, on the lower walkway, the fishermen had already claimed their spots. Dozens of lines dropped into the Golden Horn. Old men mostly, wrapped in coats, thermos flasks wedged between their feet. This was their office. They came every morning. The city had long stopped noticing them. James noticed them. He didn't know why. He had passed 1,000 such scenes in 1,000 cities. Men waiting at the edges of things. But something this morning felt different, a quality of light, perhaps, or the way the mist sat so still on the water that it seemed to be listening. He asked Adam to slow the car down. Adam looked up from his papers. "Sir? Tell the driver to slow down." The car slowed. James pressed closer to the window. That was when he saw Yusuf. He was sitting on a wooden bench near the dock. 60s, perhaps, it was hard to tell. A worn jacket, old shoes, a man whose clothes carried the quiet weight of ordinary days. He was not fishing. He was simply sitting, watching the water, as though he had nowhere else to be and felt no need to be anywhere else. Then a child appeared. A small girl, 7 or 8 years old, barefoot despite the autumn cold, in a dress too thin for the season. She held out her hand without looking up. The gesture of someone who had learned that eye contact sometimes costs more than it gives. Yusuf looked at the child for a moment. Not with pity. Not with discomfort. With a recognition, as though he had been expecting her, as though this encounter had always been written into the morning. He reached into the pocket of his jacket. Slowly. The way a man reaches for something he has already decided to give. James watched from the car. He could not hear anything through the glass. But he could see. He could see the deliberateness of it. The complete absence of hesitation. No calculation behind those eyes, no weighing of what could be spared against what should be kept. Yusuf simply gave. And then something happened that James had not seen in 40 years of watching people handle money. Yusuf did not watch the girl walk away. Every person James had ever witnessed giving, at galas, in boardrooms, in press conferences, in church aisles, they always watched. They watched to see the gratitude arrive in the other person's face. They watched to confirm that the transaction had landed correctly. Even the most generous people James had known always watched, because watching was part of what made giving feel real. Yusuf looked away before the girl had taken 2 steps. He turned back to the water. His lips moved slightly, a quiet word, directed at no one James could see. James realized he was holding his breath. Adam said something beside him. James did not hear it. The Quran says, and I want you to hear this slowly, if you disclose your charitable expenditures, they are good. But if you conceal them and give them to the poor, it is better for you. Yusuf did not know he was being watched. He gave as though Allah alone could see him. Because to him, that was the only witness that mattered. Sir. We're going to be late. James turned to look at Adam as though seeing him from a very great distance. Adam with his folder, his projections, his revised term sheets. Cancel the meeting, James said. Adam blinked. I'm sorry. Cancel it. Reschedule. Tell them something came up. He did not explain. He asked the driver to stop the car. He stepped out alone, onto the bridge, into the cold autumn air. Adam stayed inside, confused, already making calls. James walked down to the lower walkway. He had no plan. He didn't know why he was walking. He only knew that something had shifted inside him, some internal weight that 40 years of accumulated experience had not prepared him to carry, and he needed to be closer to whatever had moved it. Yusuf was still there. Still sitting. Still watching the water. James stood a few meters away. A Swiss billionaire in a navy suit, standing on a fisherman's walkway beneath a bridge in Istanbul, not knowing what to do with his hands. He had not felt this disoriented since he was 22, new to the city, and certain that the world owed him something. He thought about his foundation. About the documents he signed each December without reading. About the numbers that moved between accounts while he slept. He thought about how he had never once given anything with his own hands directly into another human being's hands. Not once. In 40 years. The thought did not make him feel guilty. It made him feel something worse than guilt. It made him feel empty. Eventually, Yusuf noticed him. Not with alarm. Not with curiosity about the expensive suit or the European face. He simply noticed another person nearby, the way you notice a bird that has landed close, without needing to understand why. He nodded. A small, unhurried nod. The greeting of someone who carries no agenda. James nodded back. He did not speak. He wasn't sure what language Yusuf spoke. He didn't know how to begin. He had opened thousands of meetings in his life, he knew exactly how to begin a conversation when something was at stake. But here, with nothing at stake and everything suddenly feeling important, he had no words. So he just stood there. And for reasons he could not explain, that felt right. After a few minutes, Yusuf reached into a worn plastic bag beside his feet, the kind of bag carried by men who carry everything they need in one hand. He produced a small glass of tea, the curved tulip shape, wrapped in paper to hold the warmth. He held it toward James. An offering. Simple and wordless. James took it. He wrapped both hands around the glass. The warmth moved through his palms, up his arms, into somewhere he had not felt warmth in a long time. He could not remember the last time someone had given him something with no expectation behind it. He drank the tea in silence. Yusuf said nothing. The fisherman's lines dipped in the dark water. A ferry moved slowly across the Horn, trailing a line of white in the gray. James would later say that those 10 minutes of silence beside Yusuf were the most valuable 10 minutes he had spent in 40 years of doing business. Not because anything was said. Because for the first time in 40 years, he was simply present, not calculating, not performing, not positioning for the next move. Just a man, holding a glass of tea, beside another man, watching a city wake up. When James returned to the car, he asked Adam to find a translator. Not for the meeting. The meeting had been cancelled. For this. For Yusuf. Adam looked at his employer for a long moment. Then he made the call. A young Turkish-English translator arrived within the hour. She stood at the edge of the dock with a small notebook she would never open. James asked her simply to help him have a conversation. He sat down beside Yusuf on the bench. Through the translator, he asked, "Do you come here every morning?" Yusuf said yes. Every morning, before the rest of the city woke up. He liked this hour. It was quiet. It belonged to nobody. James asked, "The little girl, this morning. Did you know her?" Yusuf shook his head. No. He had never seen her before. James was quiet. Then, how much did you give her? Yusuf looked at him, not with offense, not with pride, simply with the mild surprise of a man who had genuinely never considered the question worth asking. He said, "I don't know exactly. What I had in my pocket." James pressed, "But, you give like that often? To strangers you've never met?" Yusuf considered this honestly, the way sincere men consider questions they have never needed to formalize. Then he said simply, "Allah sees what I give. That is enough for me." James said nothing. The translator waited. He was thinking about his foundation. About the bronze plaque at its entrance bearing his name, polished weekly. About the photographs from the annual gala. About every time he had made giving visible, because invisibility had always felt like waste, like a missed opportunity to build something. Allah sees what I give. That is enough. He had spent 40 years making sure that other people could see what he gave. The thought arrived quietly, without violence. But it landed with the full weight of 4 decades. James flew back to Zurich the following morning. He did not sleep on the plane. He sat with a glass of still water in a crystal glass and he thought about Yusuf. About a man who had almost nothing and gave without watching. About the absolute absence of performance in every movement he had made. He thought about the verse the translator had later helped him find, when he had asked what Yusuf's lips had been moving in when he turned away from the child. She had smiled and said she could not be certain, but most likely a dua, a personal prayer offered to Allah. And then she had shown him the verse from the Quran about concealing charity, about giving as though Allah alone were the witness. He read it several times on his phone. Then he put the phone down and looked out the oval window at the clouds below. He had built his entire foundation on visibility. Visibility attracted donors. Visibility was leverage. He had been proud of the strategy. It had worked, by every measurable standard he had ever applied. But now he kept returning to the image of Yusuf turning back to the water before the girl had taken 2 steps. Not performing the giving. Just giving. Completely, cleanly, with nothing reserved for the audience. In Zurich, he called a meeting with the foundation's executive director. He did not explain. He asked one question only. Of the money we distributed last year, how much went directly, hand to hand, to individuals, with no documentation, no press release, no follow-up story? A long silence filled the room. That's not how foundations typically operate, the director said carefully. I know, said James. I'm asking what percentage. The answer was 0. What happened next took 18 months. James did not sell his company. He did not abandon his life or move to a monastery on a hillside. He did not have a dramatic moment on a mountaintop. What happened was quieter than any of that, and because it was quiet, it was real. He restructured the foundation. 30% of its annual giving was redirected into what he called, privately, only in his own handwritten notes, never for press release, a direct giving fund. No applications. No documentation requirements. No follow-up reporting. No photographs. Money moved from his accounts into the hands of individuals who needed it, through trusted local networks, without his name attached to any of it. He learned about tzedakah. Not from a scholar at first, but simply from reading. He read about the Islamic principle of giving purely for Allah, with no witness sought and no worldly return expected. He read the hadith of the Prophet, who described the person whose left hand does not know what the right hand gives as being among those whom Allah will shelter on the day when there is no other shelter. He did not convert to Islam. I want to be honest about that, because what happened to James Hargrove was not a conversion. It was a correction. A recalibration of something that had been pointed in the wrong direction for a very long time. He began giving with his own hands. Quietly, in the cities he traveled through. He returned to Istanbul twice. He walked the fisherman's walkway beneath Galata Bridge both times. He did not find Yusuf. But he sat on the bench. He brought tea. He offered it to whoever was nearby. He stopped having his name engraved on things. Yusuf never knew any of this. He never knew that a man in a navy suit had watched him from a car window on a Tuesday morning in autumn. He never knew that the same man had walked down to the dock, sat beside him, asked questions through a translator, and carried the answers back across Europe like something fragile that had to be kept level. He never knew that his act of giving, a few coins perhaps, or a folded note, whatever was in his pocket that cold morning, had redirected 18 months of a billionaire's life. Had changed the way an entire foundation operated. Had removed a man's name from a wall. He went on coming to the bridge every morning. He gave when he could. He turned away before those who received had taken 2 steps. His lips moved in the same quiet prayer. This is what the Quran means when it speaks of things unseen. When it tells us that even the smallest act of goodness, done purely, carries a weight the giver will never be able to measure. Yusuf gave to a child. He did not give to James Hargrove, he didn't even know James Hargrove existed. But Allah, in His infinite wisdom, placed that moment exactly where it needed to be placed, and let it travel exactly as far as it needed to travel. The Prophet said, "Charity does not decrease wealth." We have always understood this as reassurance for the giver. But perhaps it means something more. Perhaps it means that what leaves your hand in sincerity does not simply disappear into another person's need. It multiplies in directions you will never map. It enters rooms you will never enter. It moves through hearts you will never meet. Yusuf gave a child a few coins on a cold morning beneath a bridge. And a man 3,000 miles away spent 18 months rebuilding his relationship with wealth, generosity, and what it truly means to live. Allah saw. That was enough. I want to leave you with one thought before this video ends. We spend a great deal of time thinking about what we cannot give. About how little we have. About how the problems of the world are too large for our small pockets and our ordinary days. Yusuf did not have $3 billion. He had what was in his jacket pocket. And he gave it without watching. Without documenting. Without calculating what he could afford to spare. And somehow, in ways that were completely invisible to him, in ways that will remain invisible to him until the day of judgment, that giving changed things. Real things. In real boardrooms, in a real city across the sea, behind real doors he will never open. This is the economy of tzedakah. It does not obey the logic of the world. It obeys a different logic entirely, one that Allah has encoded into the fabric of this existence since before the first act of human generosity was ever witnessed. The Prophet told us that Allah says, "Spend, O son of Adam, and I shall spend on you." Not eventually. Not conditionally. As a statement of divine principle that does not require our understanding to function. You do not need to be wealthy to practice the kind of generosity that changes lives. You need to be sincere. You need to give without the audience. You need to turn away before the second step is taken. If this story has moved you, sit with it. Let it ask you something. Not, how much can I give, but, how do I give? Not for the gala. Not for the plaque. Not for the photograph or the applause. For Allah. Quietly. And trust the ripples to go exactly where they are meant to go. May Allah accept from all of us. May He make us among those whose left hand does not know what the right hand gives. And may He grant us the sincerity of the people of this ummah, those who give from almost nothing, and change everything. Alhamdulillah.